more hamster Brady, bringing you all of the hidden history that no one wants you to know.
It's a good description. I like it. And it's not that well hidden. It's there in plain sight. You just got to know what to look for and where to look for it.
It's hidden in the academic, educational realm. It's hidden in the media realm. And by lack of not, it's not that it's not there, to your point. It's that no one ever talks about it.
And the truth that they do talk about, it rhymes with the truth, but it's not the truth. They come close enough that maybe we'll pay a little lip service to what the real truth is, but they tell you a story, not the story. So.
Well, and to your point, I think it's funny because when you start talking to people nowadays about this topic, they'll throw out Saul Alinsky's Rule for Radicals. They'll throw out the Cloward and Piven without any understanding that that is a repackaged version of the Fabian Society. They didn't come up with any of those ideas.
No, and the Fabians, and that's what really we're going to talk about today, because we are starting our long-awaited series on the Fabian Socialists, and it's fundamentally important. Why is it so important, Colonel?
Well, because literally everything we're seeing today is downstream of the Fabian Societies, in their own words, describing the gradualism, the gradual time-phased march to one world government.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll back that up with some actual quotes from them. This is going to be a pretty long series, and we're not going to go, you basically said everything happening today, the Fabian Societies, the foundations of that. Today, we're going to go into the philosophical foundations of the Fabians themselves. Because I want to really set the, foundation of the foundation underlying. Let's see, I think we should start with who the Fabians are. And I got some different quotes on this. First of all, it's a socialist society founded in 1884 in London. And Britannica describes it as this. It says the Fabian Society is founded in 1884 in London, having as its goal the establishment of a democratic socialist state in Great Britain. Of course, they didn't just stay in Britain. The Fabians put their faith in evolutionary socialism rather than revolution. And that's really the key point, because these are not, people say, these are communists and Marxists, and there's a difference. Marxists wanted immediate violent revolution, and the Fabians wanted a slow evolutionary socialism, as they would infiltrate all of our institutions, which they've been doing for over a century. The Wikipedia describes it as a British socialist organization whose purpose is to advance the principles of, here's the key words, social democracy and democratic socialism via gradualist and reformist effort in democracies rather than by revolutionary overthrow. It's related to radicalism, which we can get into. Yeah, we should do this. There's a book called The Fabian Freeway. See if I can find it real quick.
While you're doing that, I do want to put something out there. There actually is a precursor to the Fabian Society that I ran across. It's actually called the Fellowship of the New Life. And that actually is the predecessor to the Fabian Society. And one of the things, it also was called the Guild of the New Life, i.e. The Masonic overtones. And why would that be? Because the guy that set up the fellowship in 1882 was a guy that was a Scottish American, not even making this up, Scottish American philosopher by the name of Thomas Davidson. And that's really, really important to understand, because as we go through this series, you're going to find, we'll have a whole, series on part on the Masonic, because it comes in much later on with the P2 Lodge and stuff like that. And so I want to just kind of set the stage with that pre-step to the Fabian Society, because it's going to be a reoccurring theme.
Yeah, and it's note that there's some very cultish undertones to those groups.
Yes.
Without a doubt. So one of the best books on the Fabians is written in 1966. It's called The Fabian Freeway, The High Road to Socialism in the USA, written by a Rose L. Martin. I've got it up. I've got the ebook. I forgot who is one of your followers asked me about it yesterday, and I forgot that I was already reading it. But there's a summary I got of this, just a one paragraph summary about what the book's about. It says that Martin argues that Fabian socialism, a gradualist, air quote, respectable, non-revolutionary form of socialism, poses a greater long-term threat to American liberty and constitutional government than overt communism. The book says Fabians advance their goals stealthily through infiltration of education, media, government, and elite networks, using the motto Festina lente, or make haste slowly, symbolized by a tortoise. Turtle always wins the race, right? The book claims this movement has effectively reversed the American revolutionaries' principles of limited government and individual freedom, pushing the U.S. towards centralized collectivism. That paragraph right there sums up pretty much my entire thesis of everything we've talked about.
And as it points out, it's much more lethal. And it makes you wonder if because going back to Anthony Sutton and the whole funding of all of the different variations of the violent piece of it, whether it's fascism or communism, weren't done along the way as a distraction, because all of the efforts in America and all of the stealing of our wealth has been focused on those, while the wolf in sheep's clothing, which is the Fabian motto, has not been actively working in our country while we were focused on these other diversions.
You want to pull up my screen real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, this is the wolf in sheep's clothing, their original emblem, which is basically what they were doing is we're going to pretend to be these good, kind Democrats, and we're going to work on social problems as they weasel their way into every single one of our institutions. And if you notice the parallel, when we went through Skull and Bones and the secret societies, they do the same thing. These people are Fabians. That's what we've been describing for the last couple of years. They changed their emblem to the turtle. When I strike hard. So basically what they're saying, we just wait in the weeds. And when it's time to implement our one world government and do the Great Reset, you better freaking look out. And they're close. And we saw them strike during COVID.
And that's a very interesting juxtaposition between the wolf in sheep's clothing, which is true, and the turtle, which is true. They are literally both of those things. Yeah.
And these things, they think in a timeline that's centuries long. They are patient. It's all they think in generational terms, whereas most of us are just worried about the midterms.
Correct.
And that's pretty hard to compete with. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's what they've been doing. That's why they don't mind losing world wars, because it sets the stage for the next step in their evolution.
Yes, that's exactly right.
All right, just laying a little foundation here to get some terminology down. We have a lot of misnomers in the left versus right, and I think it's important that we set the baseline for this. First of all, human social behavior is way too complex to use on a one-dimensional scale of right versus left. But the traditional one, what I'm showing right here is this is a traditional political spectrum where you have the radical and far left over here on the left. The liberal is just left of center. And that would be the modern liberal, not the classical liberal. They stole my word because I consider myself a classical liberal. Moderate, of course, is the center. You have the conservative, which is right of center, and what they call the reactionary or the far right. This is so far from being what the true economic spectrum is. But that's how they divide us between right and left, to divide us against each other. It's Hegelian, which we'll be talking about over and over again, because Hegel is the foundational philosopher of all of this, and I think next week's show is going to be almost all dedicated to Hegel, because we won't have time to get to him today. But everyone knows we've mentioned them for a while. The next spectrum, the way they describe it in a different way in terms of political, they have far left communism and far right fascism. Just to the left of communism is socialism, and they got a nice little colorful rose there. Oh. And then, of course, you have liberalism with the angel wings, boring moderates. We have the right conservatism, which is a fire without the angel wings. Then they got libertarianism, and they go from libertarianism to fascism. Now, here's why this makes no sense. I am a small L libertarian. My fundamental viewpoint is I want limited government, just enough to maintain order. And then fascism is 100% government. So how do you make the leap from libertarianism to fascism? The truth is fascism's over here on the left. That's why they call it democratic socialism. But they've done this over the last probably 70 years, stuff like that, made us think that fascisms are right wing. Nah, it's small government is to the right, big government is to the left. And it really applies to economics. Do you want the government making decisions of supply, demand, what to build, and you don't, because it'll never be efficient. Someone in Washington, D.C. does not know what the farmers in Kansas want. Farmers in Kansas know what they want. That's what we talk about. You need to protect. It doesn't. Central planning will never work. It'll always be inefficient. And once you get to the central planning, there becomes money involved in government. There's an incentive for corruption. Oops. Here's another way of looking at it, the economic spectrum. Individualism was the equality of opportunity in private ownership. Okay, that's the extreme over here. Well, with zero government, you get anarchy.
Yeah.
And over here is collectivism with economic equality, public ownership. That's where you get to, that's where you have fascism, communism, socialism, all that. That's the more accurate spectrum. There's a guy by the name of Nolan who decided to make it two-dimensional. Now, I don't really buy this philosophy. It's another way of looking at it. So the scale is economic freedom from left to right and social freedom from top to bottom. So if you want a lot of social freedom and not much economic freedom, you're the libertarian left. If you want economic freedom and social freedom, you're libertarian right. If you want less economic freedom and less social freedom, you're authoritarian left, which is pretty much where most governments are today. And if you want economic freedom but no social freedom, they talk about the authoritarian right. So I don't agree with Nolan's depiction of it, because again, he'd have fascism down here, and I think fascism belongs all the way over here on the left. But any comments on the scale of right to left?
No, that's excellent.
I just wanted to set that baseline. And I'm probably done with the screen share for today.
Okay.
Okay. Boy, that went a little quicker than I expected.
Well, let me add this, because going back to the origins, the pre-origins with the before we even get to the Fabians, the fellowship, I found an excerpt on what their promotion was. So you'll see as you present the Fabian piece of this, how, again, this is just evidence of the gradualism as they're morphing. So keep in mind, this organization started, they had all of their doctrine and stuff published by 1883. But here's their bullets on what their agenda was: replacing competition and self-seeking with unselfish regard for the general good. Simplicity of living, which means you will own nothing and live in a smart city. The highest and completest education by the government, combining manual labor with intellectual pursuits, organizing meetings for religious communion lectures and conferences. So basically, that's their indoctrination piece of it. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is when you delve into some of the organizations that morph out of the Fabian Society, I need to add one more to your education or your terms there, the overview. That's religion. These people are not religious.
They are atheists.
They are all atheists. And what is really important to understand, they talk in religious terms as an atheist. Their religion, as we get down the road to talking to the Milner group about the Milner group, they're the first ones that I saw in writing that actually says that these Fabian ideals are their religion. One world government is their religion. And they are dedicated to making it happen by all means necessary. So anytime during this, where if you're doing your own research and you hear them talk about, just like they just did, the religious communion, they're not talking about a God. They're not talking about Jesus Christ. Their religious endeavors is basically one world government. Everything, the sun sets on one world government.
Yeah, and they justify it. You know, historically, we had the wonderful Renaissance period with some of these great thinkers, many of them from Scotland, the Netherlands, some French, and a few German, great philosophers that gave us this whole ideas of the individual liberty. The whole concept is natural rights, natural law, God-given natural rights. And if any single one of us, our natural rights are taken away, then we all lose our rights. And that is juxtaposed against this whole collectivist mentality where the good of the whole outweighs the good of the individual. And the problem is these are the people that want to decide what's the good of the whole. They become the technocrats, the bureaucrats, the people that are running our world. They want to decide, and it is a religion. It is a death cult.
Yes.
But they do not respect the individual rights, and that is the fundamental difference. And that's what we're going to talk about now: is the philosophical and philosophers that set the tone for this. And if you want to say basically say the John Locke faction on one hand, were the people that I support, versus the collectivists on the other, which would be everyone from Karl Marx to Hegel to the Fabian Socialists, etc. That's really the fundamental battle that we are fighting right now from an ideological standpoint. I didn't get these. I was going to put these guys' pictures up like we usually do, but some of these portraits are so terrible that it wasn't even worth it. But okay.
As you transition to the people, I also want to add their word motto to their sheep's wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't know if you ran across this. Educate, agitate, and organize. That was their beginning motto.
Yeah, I got that one in there somewhere.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I want to sum up the book just a little bit more. So it really talks about, the book itself talks about, part one is basically Great Britain and the origins, and it traces the Fabian Society's founding, describes their strategy of gradual permeation of society through intellectual influence, education, political infiltration, rather than violent revolution. It talks about their role in creating the British Labour Party, which is in power this very day. So these people we're talking about are running England to the ground. And the second part talks about how they infiltrated the United States, how the ideas crossed the Atlantic, taking root in the elite circles. We're looking to the Turtle Bay intellectuals in the 1920s in New York. One of the big themes, is we got out of, we got into what was called the Romantic period. You had this idea in the 1800s called modernism. And these intellectuals, these people of high society, thought that they were better than their predecessors. These religious people that founded the country, they were looking for more highbrow ideas. They had to be different. This is That's where these philosophies come from. The book discusses all the presidents that were helping push the Fabians, especially FDR onwards. The key themes are gradualism versus deception, how they work through elite networks with the emphasis on Ivy League schools, foundations, think tanks. Sound familiar?
Education.
It draws the parallels to communism, but also shows the differences. And this is 1966, and this author, Martin, called it a threat to America, called it an on-rushing socialism, berating constitutional separation of powers, free enterprise, and national sovereignty through big government spending and internationalism. The call to action was Americans must recognize the tortoise now on a freeway before it's too late. So that would be incredible reading. I've only browsed it and went through a summary.
So, there was something I was going to add to that. The other bridge you're talking about, this philosophy migrating to the United States, just to tease a future segment. One of the most critical bridges of bringing this to the United States was the Pilgrim Society.
Yeah.
It was created in 1902, just after the Fabians had got all of their crap together. And it's going to be, you're going to see the names of the Pilgrim Society people when we get to it are all of these people. They included Skull and Bone members. They included State Department members. They included all of the people that we have already covered. It's another one of those entities that no one talks about that's always hovering in the background.
Very good. All right, so our two things we're going to contrast are the Lockean, John Locke, Lockean liberal tradition and the Fabian socialist tradition. And the two cannot coexist in my mind. Again, we're using the word liberal the way it's supposed to be used, meaning things like limited government, individual rights. Those were liberal thoughts. The fact that today's collectivists call themselves liberals sickens me. So we have to call ourselves classical liberals. Drives me nuts. I want the word back.
And that just goes to a long list of other words that they've co-opted, right? That's part of it, is controlling the language.
At the foundation of the United States, the Federalist Party had nothing to do with federalism. These were the big government nationalists. They were basically socialists waiting to happen. They've been doing that the entire time.
Yes.
All right. So real quick, in the nutshell, the Lockean liberal tradition is favors individual natural rights, limited government by consent, primacy of liberty, and private property. Government only exists to protect the individual. That is the fundamental belief of the Lockean liberal, and I would say myself as well. The Fabian socialist tradition is gradual, elite-driven permeation of society to achieve democratic socialism. Government is a positive tool for social engineering, equality, and collective welfare. The inevitability of gradualness is the quote. You couldn't have two more diametrically opposed philosophies, right?
Correct.
So we'll start with John Locke, who he's the main guy on my Mount Rushmore. This guy's my personal hero in many ways. He's not perfect, but some of the things he said, really resound. John Locke is known as the father of liberalism. He lived through the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution that we talked about in our last show with England in 1688, where they got the English Bill of Rights, which is what we modeled the American Bill of Rights after. And that talked about us having liberty and rights. His important works, he wrote a book called A Letter Concerning Toleration in 1689. The big one was called Two Treatises of Government in 1690. And then he wrote an essay concerning human understanding. His quotes: being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. He also writes, the great and chief end of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property. Notice the emphasis on property.
Yes.
We didn't have that prior to these great Renaissance thinkers because the king or the nobles owned everything. You didn't get private property, but you lived by their leave. This is a huge revolutionary concept that we can own our own property. In fact, Locke wrote Life, Liberty, and Property.
Yes.
And my biggest pet peeve with Thomas Jefferson is he changed it and put pursuit of happiness. Had we kept property in that declaration, so many of the socialist things they've been throwing at us over the last century would never have been allowed. It would have been even more anathema to our foundational principles. This all comes from John Locke. He says, whenever the legislators endeavor to take away and destroy the property of the people, they put themselves into a state of war with the people, who are thereupon absolved from any further obedience. It's pretty profound stuff.
Yep.
So who was he influenced by? Where did he get these ideas from? Some pretty important guys. Now, when we did the Netherlands show a little while back, we talked about my boy Hugo Grotius.
Yes.
And just a real quick reminder to everyone, he's the guy who really shaped the nature of how nations interact with each other. He was a lawyer, spent his life in exile because he's an enemy of the state. But he's known as the father of international law. And basically, he's got to put legal handcuffs on the kings and generals of Europe. He said, war is not a playground for glory. It is a legal procedure. And the only just reason is to go to war: self-defense, recovery of stolen property, or to punish a crime. He's the guy who created Jus in Bello, the law in war. So that's just one of the big, big influences on our boy John Locke. Another big influence was one of my favorite names in history, Samuel von Pufendorf. Pufendorf is a German jurist, a political philosopher, an economist, and a historian. And he's famous for his revisions of natural law theories of Hobbes and Grotius. And my favorite quote from him is, the fundamental natural law is this: that every man must cherish and maintain sociability so far as in him lies. Okay. Locke's next real big influence was a guy by the name of René Descartes.
Mm-hmm.
French philosopher. You know Descartes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
1596 to 1650. He was a French philosopher, logician, scientist, and mathematician. These people are multidisciplined for a reason. The whole logic, the philosophical thinking crossed over from math to science to economics. They weren't specialized to the degree we are now. And I think we always tried to make the Renaissance man we talk about. That's what these guys were. They were the true Renaissance men. Some of the greatest people that ever lived. And Descartes, of course, is a seminal figure in the emergence of modern philosophy and science. He's the guy who said, I think, therefore I am. Some of his other great quotes: doubt is the origin of wisdom. I love that one.
Yep.
Skepticism. He also says, divide each difficulty into as many parts as is feasible and necessary to resolve it. So that was the great René Descartes. And again, I didn't show these pictures for a reason. Those portraits make these guys look pretty darn ugly. So who did John Locke influence? Some pretty important people too. Adam Smith, alive 723 to 1790, a Scottish economist and philosopher. This is the big proponent of free markets, the invisible hand, and minimal government in the economy. Smith's theories weren't perfect, but they're certainly on the right track. The books he wrote were The Theory of Moral Sentiments in 1759 and An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations in 1776. These are the guys that our founding fathers were reading. They founded this country based on these ideas.
Right.
They wrote a constitution that enshrined them into law, and yet somehow we lost it.
Because of the Fabian gradualism, little by little by little.
Yeah, and it was even happening before the Fabians really articulated it. The Fabians just took it to a brand new level and said, okay, this is exactly how we're going to have a state-controlled society.
But see, that's why when we were doing the Roosevelts, that's why I made such a big deal out of the one uncle that wrote in 1850 that paper that basically was socialism.
Yes.
And this has been around for a long time. The fact that they actually set up the Fabian Society and put an emblem and got a motto doesn't mean that that was the beginning of this thought process. It was the consolidation and almost the accreditation of it formulating, but those thoughts both on both sides of the Atlantic has been around for a very long time from very prominent families.
Yeah, and you can find some of the roots of this stuff in the Greek philosophers. Both sides of this debate, the Greeks had versions of.
Yes.
Okay, where am I? Oh, Adam Smith. Some of his great quotes, and I love this one. This is from The Wealth of Nations. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. What he's saying there is, the guys, the butcher, the brewer, and the baker aren't making their wares because they like you. They're making it because they think they can make something that other people will value, so you'll pay them so they can look after themselves. Some people call that capitalism. He didn't. But it's exactly how efficient markets work. It's exactly how collectivism doesn't work.
It's the individual doing what is best for the individual. Yeah. You, based on your skill set and your interest, you are going to do something that allows you to make a living.
And there's so many decision points made in a free market of decisions of whether, I'm going to buy this loaf of bread or that one. And the market will respond with pricing mechanisms. And no AI centralized computer could ever be as efficient as a market that's allowed to operate without the government sticking its hand in there.
Correct.
That is what the free market is all about. Every single one of us making choices. And the market will respond a lot faster than the government will. That's for damn sure. We've seen what happens when you get government centralized control. You get bread lines in Russia. You get the Holodomor, people starving all over Ukraine. We've seen it time after time. Government does not, central planning will not work. So sorry, technocrats, no matter how smart your AI gets, it'll never be as smart as a free market because people change their minds. The market's always getting constant feedback and decisions. And if you want something that the market's not producing, someone will step in and produce it. And that's how we went, we produced more wealth in the last 200 years than an entire history of mankind. All right, more quotes from Smith. Every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest, his own way. He says, little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. So obviously Adam Smith was foundational in the founding of the United States. Who else did John Locke influence? Oh, how about Thomas Jefferson? My favorite of the founding fathers. Alive 1743 to 1826. And of course, he is known for talking about inalienable rights. And of course, wrote the Declaration of Independence. And again, my only pet peeve with Jefferson, of course, is he left out property. And we are paying the price for that today. Best example of that I can give you is you hear these people talking about stakeholder capitalism, or basically because you live in the neighborhood, you've got a stake in my company. That is we would never have gotten that across the starting, got the starting line if we had life, liberty, and property.
Correct.
How about some Jefferson quotes? Jefferson also was influenced by Montesquieu, and we could do some Montesquieu all day long, but it's going to sound about like the same stuff. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, it doesn't stop there. That's when Lincoln did the Gettysburg Address. He stopped that all men are created equal. The rest of that sentence reads that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you say all men are created equal, and then you have government policy that tries to make everyone have an equal outcome, you do so by taking away everyone else's rights. That's not what Jefferson said. That's why Lincoln is a collectivist. And he most certainly would have been very happy with the Fabian Socialists. Jefferson wrote, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." Think we're overdue for that?
No comment.
We are not inciting violence, people. Actually, I think the biggest mistakes they made is with the Article 5 conventions. They should have required it every 10 years because it's the only tool they gave the states to pull back the tyrannical federal government. That is the only tool we have, and yet we've never had a convention of states. It should have been mandatory every 10 years, and that's what Jefferson was talking about.
But let me suggest to you that if they hadn't effed up the Senate process, that was the check and balance, which is why they destroyed it.
Yeah, that's a big one, the 17th Amendment.
Yeah.
But we were already way down that line. We were just gotten out of, this is the progressive era. We're in the middle of it. And we've already got,
the pendulum swings, and I believe that in the gradualism philosophy that the undoing of the state's appointment of senators was like a long pole in the tent, because it happened at the same time of the individual tax and all of that other stuff in order to prop the whole thing up. That period of time was critical. And when did it happen? It happened after all of these people got together, the Fabian Society, the Pilgrim Society, the CFR. It happened all in that same span of time.
Yeah, and like we said, these were not new ideas. They were just taken to the next level at that point in time. We're asked all the time, when we teach the Constitution, when did these great ideas get derailed? And what Doug's answer, which I'll steal from, is before the ink was even dry on the paper. You had Hamilton stepping in there, saying, "Well, you got to read between the lines." And Jefferson says, "Well, I've read between the lines, and all I see is blank space."
And that's true. There's always going to be forces there, but you see a market shift after the 1900s in that time frame right there.
I still say that the biggest shift in terms of taking away states' rights was 1861, when Lincoln decided to fight a war.
I'm not talking about state rights. I'm talking about that disassembling of the Constitution with the individual taxation, the changing of the way we elect our senators. That to me was monumental.
Yeah, well, to me, the right to secede because of a voluntary union was foundational to getting us to that point. After that, we were being held together at the point of a bayonet. And of course, the income tax was always going to happen because of that. Again, these are just different steps of the different. They've always just taken steps forward.
Yes, the rungs of the ladder.
Yeah. Jefferson also wrote, "To take from one because it is thought his own industry has acquired too much in order to spare to others who have not exercised equal industry is to violate arbitrarily the first principle of association, the guarantee to everyone the free exercise of his industry." Let's talk about taxation.
Well, and redistribution of wealth and everything else, the welfare system, like everything.
So we talk about transitions. Most people held these viewpoints, the classical liberal, right around the time of the Revolution. And then we get the French Revolution, where the Jacobins get inserted in what was supposed to be a Republican revolution, and it became the first communist revolution, to be honest with you. It was the first leftist. The French Revolution was fought by leftists. The most violent people were always on the left, because like the Colonel said, by any means necessary. To these people, the ends always justify the means.
Correct.
And that makes them so damn dangerous. As we see that, and we saw that on display in Tennessee yesterday. And we see it all over the country, and yet our FBI managed to spend millions of dollars of man hours trying to create the illusion that it's the quote unquote right wing that's the violent right wing extremists, while the Southern Poverty Law Center is financing to create to create this. That's why they manufactured January 6th. They have to keep this image up. But history tells us that the left has always been the violent ones. The key bridge figure in the philosophies of these philosophers is a guy by the name of John Stuart Mill. And he lived from 1806 to 1873. He's so important because if you read John Stuart Mill when he's younger, he would have agreed with Adam Smith and John Locke. And then he transitioned and got into kind of morphed liberalism into what's now social liberalism. He was that central figure. He's a very important part of our history. And the Fabians absolutely love him. His key philosophy was called the harm principle. And he had these evolving views on intervention. The longer he lived, the more he wanted the government to get involved and to force his outcomes. So you can hear his quotes. If you read Mill, you have to understand it's got to be done chronologically, because the later Mill, early Mill says the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. Well, that's a libertarian. That's the non-aggression principle, right?
Right.
And then he says, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. Nothing wrong with that at all. Later on, he says, the social problem of the future is to be the best possible reconciliation of liberty with equality. What? What happened there, Stuart Mill? So this is the guy. He's the bridge. And his writings were a big deal. And when we get into the Fabians, he'll be brought up again. Next important philosopher of this period is a guy who we know and love by the name of Karl Marx. Marx, of course, we've heard his quotes all day long, so I'll go through them as quick as I can. But, he lived from 1818 to 1883 with his lifelong best friend, Frederick Engels, who we'll talk about. Engels was the son of a wealthy mercantilist family, so Marx never had to work a day in his life. He's described as a German philosopher, political theorist, sociologist, and economist. They wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Abraham Lincoln had a copy of the Communist Manifesto. He liked it. Tell people think Lincoln's a great man. Yeah, thank you, Abe. Marx would go on to write Das Kapital in 1867 through 94. It was a long, ongoing series of articles. And of course, he preached violent revolution and class warfare. Marx said, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. And the famous, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, which is the exact opposite of the free market system we were just singing the praises of. And we could do a whole show on Marx, but I think everyone knows enough about him. Obviously, the violent class struggle didn't happen. Didn't even happen in Russia, people. That was a London and Wall Street bank financed foreign invasion. It wasn't an uprising of the masses. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. When it didn't happen, they switched. We'll get into this a little bit later, but you'll find that the Frankfurt School, a bunch of 9 professors came over to America, mostly Ivy League schools. They introduced something called cultural Marxism. We're living through that today. but that's later in our story. So stay tuned. Who was Karl Marx's biggest influences? Well, Frederick Engels, his buddy, who was born in Prussia to a prosperous mercantile family, immediately rejected his devout family's pietist values. The Colonel mentions these people are atheists. He joined a group called the Young Hegelians. Who?
Hegel?
Oh, yeah. So this is a group of German intellectuals in the 1830s and 40s, and they're all atheists, and they're trying to, we're entering this period of modernism. With the Industrial Revolution is on. Life has gotten easy. We have this new class system coming in, into the West. These are the young Hegelians, these young intellectuals, and they're rejecting all the great teachings of the Renaissance thinkers. And these are the ones that they were the predecessors. One generation later, they become the Fabian Socialists. And of course,
they morph into the Fabians.
They do. And their ideas, the Fabians basically collected all their ideas and formalized it. And turned it into an action plan. We've already talked about Cecil Rhodes. He's alive at this exact period of time. This is the Civil War was not, quote unquote, Civil War is not the only major change. These are conflicting value systems that are going on. It's a huge part of why that war was fought, was these two conflicting ideas. Top-down government control versus individual liberty. Guess which side Lincoln was on?
You've told us.
I'm going to keep hammering that one home until everyone understands. Of course, the biggest influence of Karl Marx was one Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who I think we're going to have to spend most of the show next week on.
Okay.
There's just too much to him, and it's too important. Would you agree?
Yes.
All right. George Bernard Shaw's in there, but we'll talk about the founders of the Fabians when that's coming up. I won't get into their philosophers because there's a bunch of them. I do want to kind of switch gears on this because this topic's been going around quite a bit. Okay. And that is our friends at the Promethean Action Group. Barbara Boyd, what's the other name, that the one you've been on the show with?
Susan Kukenda.
Yeah. And another one of these LaRouchians is my friend Matthew Ehret. And I'm not calling these people out because I think they're necessarily bad people. I'm calling them because I have a fundamental disagreement. I consider Matt Ehret to be one of the best historians going. He's a gentleman. I've had him on my channel. He's had me on his, and I do consider him a friend. We disagree on a couple of things, and I want to get into that because I think it's important with these Promethean Action people coming out of nowhere and getting so many followers so fast. And I agree with Promethean Action on a lot of what they're saying about the history. They're not wrong. They just come to a different conclusion. And I want to discuss that here.
And I think having those philosophical differences out in the open is exactly what needs to happen so people can come to their own conclusion.
Yeah. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation. People are trying to get Matt and I to have this discussion for a long time. It just hasn't happened. Again, I got a ton of respect for him. This is a disagreement. The thing about the LaRouchians is you need to look up who Lyndon LaRouche was. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about him. It's a very well-funded group. And anybody who calls themselves a LaRouchian, like these Promethean Action people, they're going to have done their homework. It's sort of like when you meet someone with the John Birch Society. They are very well taught. They know their arguments. And I get to debate Birchers all the time on the Article 5 convention. And I like these people a lot. We just disagree on this fundamental thing. And they still haven't answered the question of how are you going to have the federal government curtail itself without an Article 5 convention. There is no answer to it. Vote harder. So in fact, Matt put out a piece recently when he's talking about what's called the English free market system versus the American system of economics. First of all, what he calls the English free market system is what I was describing from John Locke. That was not the English system. The English system at the time was mercantilism. Mercantilism is where a few favored companies get advantages because they're closer to the government. It's like having a government monopoly. And this is why the Dutch East India Company failed and why the Netherlands, Dutch Republic fell. It's why the British Empire fell, because of the mercantilist system is by definition corruption. Anytime the government gets to hand out goodies, it invites corruption, period. End of story.
So can I just add something here? I know you're on a roll, but I want to put this in context for people who are not familiar with Matt. And again, this isn't a slight. I just want to put it in context so our audience understands. Matt lives in Canada. Canada is part of the crown. So it is very different perspective from the viewpoint that Brady is presenting. Regardless of where you're at, origins matter, and there is all of your previous experiences. It's very hard and challenging for people to step outside of their comfort zone. And Brady's point is dead on. Oftentimes referred to as capital cronyism. The mercantile system is not a good system. Go ahead.
No, thank you. That's excellent. It is not. In fact, we fought a bloody Revolutionary War to get away from the mercantilist system. Great examples. They put a tea tax on us and a stamp tax act, so our American companies couldn't compete against the British. This is protectionism. This is what the Larouchians are touting is the American system. That protecting a few small industries is good, and I'm saying no, it's not. I want a free market and get the government the hell out of it, and I'm okay with a tariff. What's called, but not a protective tariff. There's a difference between the two, because one of them gets corrupted. If there's a flat tariff, basically to protect domestic production, that's a good thing, as long as it's even and spread across the board. When the government starts picking winners and losers, you get corruption. The first of these people, the American mercantilists, was Alexander Hamilton. And he sat there in the convention in 1787 and argued for a British system only under an American king. He hated the British, but he wanted to be like them. Well, he got shot down, voted, Then he turns around, writes the Federalist Papers, because it's going to be really hard to get this thing ratified in New York, the Constitution, writes the Federalist Papers and says a lot of really good things supporting the Constitution. Then the richest guy in America writes a letter, a guy by the name of Morris, writes a letter to Washington and recommends Hamilton be the Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton gets there and then does everything he wanted to do, regardless of what the Constitution says, including starting a central bank. That's not allowed. That's not in the Constitution. So if you're going to have a written law, you should probably follow it. And when I say things started going wrong before the ink was dry, that's because Hamilton got there. And Robert Morris isn't necessarily a bad guy. He helped finance when Washington was broke. Morris sent him money. So he's not a terrible guy. Interesting side story. One of the first things Hamilton did is he nationalized all the state Revolutionary War debt. Well, that's not in the Constitution as an enumerated power, but he did it anyways. But it's worse than that, because he told his cronies that he was going to do that. So what happens is, you're a guy like Robert Morris, you hire the fastest horses and boats and go all around to all the different colonies, one of their states, and buy up all of this Revolutionary War debt from the Revolutionary War veterans who got paid in paper scrip from the states. They're trading at like 5 cents on the dollar. They don't know it's going to be nationalized. These people take the scrip back to D.C. and it becomes whole as a dollar. These people made 20 times their money. Robert Morris made over $300 million in that period of time by buying up Revolutionary War heroes' debt. That was disgusting. Morris, of course, on a side note, would die penniless. He was a pauper, spent his last years. So.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, it's a really sad story. But that's what that's the problem is. Anytime the government gets involved in the economy, you're going to get crony capitalism or mercantilism.
Insiders that share that intel, which is happening right now.
Yeah, and now you have an incentive to get politicians in there that will hand out goodies to their buddies. And now you get the corrupt system that we see that we're living through today.
Correct. And
it starts with that you can't give them an inch, because it'll always incrementally get more and more and more. And they never take a step backwards. The big one Hamilton pushed for was federally funded internal improvements. And that's a direct quote. What that meant in his time was building canals so his shipbuilding buddies could do more commerce. Well, canals are great. And this is what the American system's all about. that the government spend money so we can all make more money. But what it does is it once again produces winners and losers. It is a corrupt system, and it makes for a corrupt government. You cannot have it. If a canal is a great idea, guess what? The private system can build it just as easily, right?
Right.
If it makes that much sense. Okay, so I got a great example to close with. Lincoln, the entire Republican Party, its plank in the 1860 election was the first two parts of its plank were federally funded internal improvements and, of course, protective tariffs. They had to protect their industries from the Brits because the South was shipping all their stuff to Europe, all their cottons for the textile place, and the North needed to tax that because that's the only way they could build their factories to compete. Every time you put an import tariff is an export tax. So when the South seceded, the North couldn't live without that tax. That's what the war was all about. But the Republican Party ran on federally funded internal improvements. In this case, it was building the railroads. And we know what happened with the railroads. After the war, we created the robber barons, people like the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, you name it. All the robber barons got rich on government federally funded internal improvements, created the greatest wealth disparity in history. Yeah, they ended slavery, and then they put a bunch of people to work at wages that were worse than slavery. It's how we got unions. This was the corrupt system. So I'm going to give you a great example of this. Everybody's heard of the Transcontinental Railroad, right?
Yeah.
There was another Transcontinental Railroad built about a decade or so later. Okay, that was done by the Transcontinental Railroad was federally funded. They were given land grants, which means give you free land. They bought out, the federal government bought out anybody who's in the way of the railway. The railroad barons took bribes from towns to say, okay, I want to get the railroad to go through my town. But here's the comparison of what a government does versus what a privately built railroad does. The Transcontinental Railroad, built in 1869, 1,911 miles. The Great Northern Railway, built about a decade and a half later, privately financed by James J. Hill and financed privately through investments, was 1,700 miles long. So pretty comparable, right? Transcontinental Railroad, government funded, took it 6 years to get it to build. The private one took 3 years. The government cost $48,000 per mile. The private one cost $30,000 per mile. Total cost of the Transcontinental Railroad was $125 million. $61 million of it was government funded. Total cost of the Great Northern Railway, $51 million.
So half.
Yeah, less than half. Half the time at less than half the cost. Private versus government. And of course, the government. What's that?
True every time.
Every single time. That's why you cannot have central planning. It'll always be inefficient and corrupt. And of course, there were scandals all over the Transcontinental Railroad. All kinds of, and I'll remind you that Lincoln was a railroad lawyer from day one. Those are the people who hired him to be president.
That's right.
The Great Northern Railway was praised for efficient construction without taxpayer burden. Free market, socialism. Which one do you want?
Free market.
Every single time. Sorry, I told you this is a show I was kind of been training for my whole life.
It is.
There's more on this stuff, but I am very passionate about free markets and individual liberty, as you can tell.
You've done an awesome job.
I think we need to spend some time on Hegel before we get to the founding of the Fabians. Said a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree, because he's fundamental to it.
Yeah, we're living. We see him every day. I mean, that's why we've been talking about it on shows for 3 years. For the love of God.
That's the whole crux of the Operation Gladio, is the Hegelian dialect.
It really is. And that was such a great analogy. Who was it? The SR that came up with it yesterday? I called the State Department one wing of the bird. Goes, no, that's the beak of the foreign policy. That was so good. Well, thank you, everyone, for letting me get on my soapbox. This is something I'm very passionate about, this topic. It feeds into our storyline, but there was no way I was going to get off the hook. And again, we got a ton of respect for these Promethean action people in that. There is a fundamental disagreement. And
so understand this, because I'm going to talk about this for a minute militarily. When you go into an operation with coalition forces, there's a basis and there's an end state, and then there's the operation, right? So people come from different perspectives on why this operation is necessary. You don't all have to agree. You have to agree on it being necessary, but not for the same reasons. Also, once the operation is over, because you came into it with different agendas, you are going to use that operation for a different end state. You're not all collectively going towards the same end state. This may be step 3 in someone else's end step. It may have been just one and done for party number 2, and it may be step 4 on party number 3. But all 3 parties are going to engage in the operation and continue with their own vested interests at the end of the operation. So just because you spend time in the trenches together with someone does not mean you are headed in the same direction. And that is something that is incredibly important from a military perspective, because during the time that you're in the operation, based on where they started and where they're going, you need to make sure that the operation isn't affected by differing agendas. And so you can lock arms with people during an event or for a period of time and disagree on the end state. And I think that's what you're articulating.
Yeah.
It is possible that they're looking for a different end state, but we are on a journey right now where their expertise is very important educationally for what is going on. And we may agree on many of the points that they have during this particular phase, but we may not agree on the end state.
Yeah, and it's similar to something I've been saying. You know, they're talking about making the world seem binary, and I'm saying there's a third way that the Constitution actually preached. You know, they're basically comparing is the British internationalist system versus an American nationalist system. With their economic nationalism is something that's what Trumpian economics is the part of the American system. It's Trump would have agreed with Hamilton and Lincoln because he cares about growing GDP and stuff like that, and he's not a constitutionalist per se. I think those people are absolutely necessary to defeat the internationalists, who we now call globalists, the one world government people. We need economic nationalists on our side to do that because the free market can't do it. We are stronger collectively. One thing centralized government is good at is fighting wars. Mm-hmm. That's it. But decentralized, self-ownership is not as good at fighting wars. So we need them to win this battle. It's what happens afterwards that I care about. And I'm sure as hell not going to live under a different version of fascism just because it's national versus international. And so I agree with them that they're on our side. They're America first types, but the solution will be different. I mean, once we need a Donald Trump right now, a strong leader. The whole point of one world government is you have to destroy all the other governments. There can be no individual nation state. Correct. So America has to fall. Well, I don't want America to fall because I do believe we're different. So for now, I'm behind any policy to make sure that America stays strong, even though I don't agree with everything we do, like in places like Iran, et cetera. A strong America is imperative so we don't get one world government because that's what the Fabians want. Correct. What they've always wanted. So we need these nationalists. When the smoke clears after we've won and we've got a multipolar world or what have you, whatever the end game is, now then we can have a conversation about getting back to limited government. Correct. So, and that's why I consider these people allies, although it's a fundamental difference in philosophy. And I think that's what your military analogy kind of fits that perfectly.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. You have to achieve your objective first, then we can settle the peace.
Then we go back and read some more Adam Smith?
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Yes. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We will be back next Friday with Hegel. You don't want to miss that.
Yes, George Gord. What is his name again? I had to set it. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
I'm going to let you say that. I'm just going to call him Hegel.
Done.
All right.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us.